Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. Welcome back to today's podcast, car lovers. Today we are going to be talking about one of the greatest cars from history, one of my favorite cars, and fun fact, this is my girlfriend's favorite car. She saw it at a car museum and absolutely fell in love with it. We are going to be talking about the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. Yes, that's right. We are taking it way back to the Edwardian era, the brass era of automobiles. We are going to be talking about the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. We are going to be talking about the civilian Silver Ghost and what it had to offer. We're going to be talking about the military Silver Ghost. Yes, there was a military spec version of this car. And we are going to be talking about crazy war stories that this car was involved in. And in segment 4, you are obviously going to hear what my thoughts were on this Rolls Royce Silver Ghost and a crazy car story of my own. So let's get started. The Rolls Royce Silver Ghost was made from 1906 to 1926. So for a period of 20 years, the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost was produced and made for the world market. In the early days of Rolls Royce, the cars were named actually after how much horsepower they made. And apparently, horsepower was a huge deal back then, it still is today. But when you take cars from this era, I mean, cars were just beginning to get removed from the horse and buggy. So a lot of these cars were still horseless carriages, as they say. So about how many horsepower a car could make was actually a very big deal. The original name for the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost, even though it was originally named Silver Ghost within Rolls Royce, but it was marketed to the public as the Rolls Royce 40/50 horsepower because they had two variants of the engine. A variant that produced 40 horsepower and a variant that produced 50 horsepower. And the one that came before it was called the Rolls Royce 30 horsepower. And the one that came after it, then that's when they stopped using the horsepower numbers as names, and then they started giving their cars real names. So, in fact, the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost was not actually known as the Silver Ghost officially within Rolls-Royce until 1925, when they reached towards the end of their production run, and Rolls-Royce came out with the Phantom 1, and they started calling all the older cars the Silver Ghost in order to, I guess, combat confusion, if you will. So that's what the car was actually called. It was called the Rolls-Royce 40/50 horsepower. It was an amazing automobile. And I'm not just saying that because I like it. I'm not just saying that because I chose to do this podcast on it. It was actually an amazing automobile. Take a listen to some of the things that this thing had to offer. It was powered by an I6 engine. It was way ahead of its time. I6 engines of the time period were experimental, were not very common. They were just coming out with 4-cylinder engines. So the fact that Rolls-Royce decided to jump the gun and create a 6-cylinder engine, which the way that was designed, it was basically 2 inline 3 engines tacked together. It was revolutionary. It was ahead of its time. It was basically two i3 engines stacked together, and it was capable of producing insane amounts of horsepower, which 40 or 50 horsepower in the day, when you took your average car, was making about 10 horsepower, is pretty crazy. And not only that, these cars were overbuilt. They were overbuilt, and they gained a reputation for being quiet. They gained a reputation for being reliable, and they gained a reputation for being well built, which the average car of the time period could not lay a claim to any of those adjectives I just said. They were not quiet, they were not well built, and they were not reliable. They were smoke belching machines. I mean, this was not the greatest time period for cars. You had the purists who were holding on to their horse and buggies, saying that cars were just going to be a fad, and then you had the people who recognized that cars were the future, that were trying to get cars to be better, but because the technology was still very new, I mean, cars had just been invented, say 20 years earlier in 1886 by Carl Benz. So just for 20 years, the car has been struggling, and then all of a sudden Rolls Royce comes out with this, and they are like, wow, this is the best car in the world. And I will also like to tell you, this is a fun fact, that the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost was not just the name for this series of cars, this model of cars from 1906 to 1926. The Rolls Royce Silver Ghost actually referred to a specific car that was used as a press car by Rolls Royce. It was commissioned by, I believe, oh dear, I can't quite remember his name, but he was basically the marketing manager for Rolls Royce, and he commissioned a Silver Ghost with silver bodywork, stainless steel plating, everything, the whole 9 yards. He commissioned it, and he put it towards the endurance trials that were happening in Ireland. That's not what they were called, but basically they would test a car for its reliability, and he did amazing things with it. For example, he sealed the hood, removed the toolbox, and drove the car 620 miles, and it was fine. And this is when people were like, oh my gosh, this car really is reliable, I need to get one. So anybody who had money, anybody who had any sort of status, who could afford a Rolls Royce, was basically drooling over the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. This car was, my goodness, this car was like, I guess what a modern day equivalent of this car would be is like the Mercedes-Benz S-Class of today. And I can't even say the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, because the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, whereas it is a luxurious, is not known for being particularly reliable. It was I don't know what it was. There's not really a car today that lives up to the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. I mean, of course, there are modern Rolls-Royces, but modern Rolls-Royces are made by BMW. They're hardly English anymore. I mean, they might still be built there, but all the engineering is German. So Rolls-Royces have really lost their roots as far as the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost goes. I mean, you've got a Rolls-Royce Ghost that's still being produced today. So I guess this is the ancestor of today's Rolls-Royce Ghost, but this car is completely different, a completely different animal, completely different philosophy went into building it, a completely different philosophy went into marketing it, and frankly, it wasn't the same audience today that bought a Rolls Royce of old. People of old were looking for reliability. They were looking for necessity, and they were not afraid to spend a pretty penny on it, including having all the creature comforts, having the body being coach built, having them being custom. As a result, almost no two Rolls Royce Silver Ghosts were the same, because they were all custom bodied. You bought the chassis and the engine from the factory. You called up a coach builder, and they built you the body on the car that you wanted. That's how luxury cars were sold back then. The prestigious publication Autocar hailed the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost as the best car in the world. So if that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what will. The Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, which, you know what, I found it. This is the most, I guess, recent example I can think of. The Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost was like the Mercedes 300D today. This was the best car in the world. This was the Mercedes 300D before there was a Mercedes 300D. The Mercedes 300D was known as being a great, reliable, well-built car. These cars were capable of 400, 500,000 miles and are still being sold today. I mean, though they stopped making them in the 80s, but this is the most recent example of the car that I can think of, the Mercedes 300D. This is the sort of legacy that the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost had before there was a Mercedes 300D to come and take away the moniker of the best car in the world, at least in my book. The engine and chassis were so well built that they were used for a series of armored cars by Rolls-Royce. And that's what's actually going to be the topic of the next segment, in which I'm going to talk about the armored cars that were used in the military by Rolls-Royce. They were overbuilt, infinitely reliable, simple to work on, and made with the highest quality materials. A total of 7,874 Silver Ghosts were made, including 1,701 at the Springfield, Massachusetts factory here in the United States. So I thought you would like to know that. Some of those Rolls Royces were actually American made. I didn't know that until I started doing research for it, and I find that rather amazing because as far as I'm concerned, and as far as I know, I don't believe any other Rolls-Royce was made in America after that. I believe after World War I, they shut down the Springfield, Massachusetts plant. I don't think it ever reopened. The specific Silver Ghost, the specific Silver Ghost was a press car made by, commissioned by Claude Johnson, commercial and managing director of Rolls-Royce, to be used as a promotion car, almost like a concept car today, to show off the reliability and quietness of their car. And fun fact, Vladimir Lenin owned one with snow tracks fitted to it. So we're talking about, this is the car that anybody worth their salt was going to buy. If you were an official of government, if you had money, if you had prestige, if you had good taste, if you wanted something that was good, that wasn't going to constantly break down, that wasn't smelly, that wasn't belching smoke, that wasn't terribly unreliable, this is a car you bought. Yes, you shelled out a pretty penny for it, but just to show you how reliable these things were, some of them are still running today. Some of them are still running today, and Rolls-Royces of this time period have been known to be owned by the same family, and then they will write to Rolls-Royce after 80 years after the car finally breaks down, and they will complain. Yes, I've heard stories. It's not as far-fetched as I like to think it is. It's actually true. A man owned a Rolls-Royce from this time period. He owned it for 80 years. I mean, the man was like 100. And it finally broke down. And he wrote to the factory and complained that his Rolls-Royce had broken down after 80 years. This is what Rolls-Royce was known for at the time period. They were known for building the best car in the world. Obviously, that's not the case today, because if it were the case today, a lot more people would own Rolls-Royces. I think the title, the best car in the world, has probably gone to something made by Mercedes-Benz, or has probably just not been used because, frankly, most of the cars nowadays, especially ultra-high luxury cars like that, they're not looking for reliability. They are looking for technology, and they are looking for innovation. And which, brings me back to the podcast that I did on luxury cars, specifically traditional American luxury. But I will say the same thing for all sorts of luxury vehicles. They've really switched away from being comfort focused and reliability and build quality focused to technology, performance, and innovation focused, which that's not a bad thing, because cars today are obviously more reliable than cars of old, but they're not as reliable as the cars that came towards the middle of the history of cars. Cars started out as being not very reliable at all, and if you wanted to get a real good one, you had to spend a ton of money for a luxury car. And then cars got to the point where they started to get really good, really reliable, and I think the really good, really reliable peak hit in the 90s. And then after the 2000s began to come and then cars started getting loads and loads of unnecessary technology, I believe the reliability is on the downward spiral again. I don't know if it'll go up again. I foresee it going up, especially with the dawn of electric cars. At least the popularity dawn of the electric cars. The electric cars have been around for almost as long as gas cars. But as electric cars become more popular, you will find that maybe cars will go back to being more comfort focused and reliability focused than being focused on just innovation and technology after the electric car technology becomes more commonplace. Because as I probably will mention at some point in the future, electric cars have the potential to be infinitely more reliable than gas cars because frankly they're simpler, there are less moving parts, and there's less things to break. So that's my short rant on electric cars, but we're going to go back to talking about the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost in the next segment, so please stay tuned, and we are going to be discussing the military spec Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. So please stay tuned after the break, folks.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Welcome back, car lovers. So right now we are actually going to be talking about the military spec Silver Ghost. As I mentioned earlier, there were about 8,000, give or take, Rolls Royce Silver Ghosts made. 7,874 to be exact. But there were 120 Silver Ghost chassis that were commissioned, I guess is the word, for service during World War I to serve as the basis for an armored car by Rolls-Royce. Now, let me just explain to you what I mean by armored car. The armored car I'm talking about was not like a Jeep. Jeeps came out in World War II. Jeeps were supposed to be lightweight, kind of disposable vehicles that were made to just carry soldiers into battlefields, and they were not armored. Some of them had guns mounted on them, but this is different from a Jeep. The Rolls-Royce armored car was like the tank before tanks became reliable and before tanks were a viable option in the battlefield. Of the time period, there were tanks back during World War I, but it was not sort of the same thing that we think of today. If we're thinking of what role the Rolls-Royce armored car that was based on the Silver Ghost chassis fulfilled during World War I, it is basically what a tank fulfills today. It was armored, it carried soldiers, it had guns mounted on it, and it was able to go into rough terrain, into enemy territory, and just wreak havoc, if you will. I mean, this car was a war hero. And I don't use that term lightly. War heroes are real people who fought and sometimes gave their lives for, but the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, if there were a war hero in the car world, this car would be deserving of that title as a war hero. And you will soon find out why. These vehicles, like I said, were not tanks, but they were fitted with machine guns and bulletproof armor plating that could protect against the standard ammunition rounds of the time. I'm not saying that bullets never made it through the armor on the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost armored cars, but the standard ammunition rounds used by infantry of the time period were no match for the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. And the armor plating that was fitted to them. Military spec Ghosts were used mainly in the desert, and combat and rescue missions, in the desert, of course. The reason why is because after fitting these cars with, I guess, all the plating, all of the extra things that you needed to fit them with, they were very heavy, they were ungainly, and what had happened was the fact that they were not able to be used effectively in the western end of the war, the western front of the war, because the battlefields were a lot more muddy, the trench warfare, trenches, I mean, it was not a viable option to use Rolls Royce Silver Ghost armored cars, where armored cars, regardless of who made them, were just not very viable in the muddy trenches. They would get stuck. They were hard to control. And when you're getting all that extra weight on a car that only had 80 horsepower, they were upgraded to 80 horsepower for the military spec version. I mean, there's only so much you can do. But in the desert, that's where the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost really shone, or shined, I guess. It was amazing. And not only were they used in desert warfare, they were also used in the Irish Civil War by the Irish Free State in their efforts against the Irish Republican Army. And by the time World War II rolled around, get this, folks, World War II was from 1935 to 1945. So we're thinking 1939 to 1935. So we're thinking that the last Rolls Royce Silver Ghost was produced in 1925. But obviously World War I ended in 1917. So the ones that were requisitioned for World War I were probably built in 1914. So think this. From 1914 all the way to 1939, when these cars were used again, there were 76 Rolls-Royce armored cars still in military service. Several years later, we're talking about 25 years later, from 1914 to 1939, there were 25 years later, there were still 76 of them left in military service that were used until 1941, when they were retired, when more modern designs of armored cars and tanks and things of the like became available. So that is an amazing statistic. The fact that cars of that time period barely lasted 10 years, let alone 25 years, let alone 27 years, as some of the oldest ones were. There were still some Rolls-Royce armored cars that were still left in military service up until 1941, where they were forcibly retired. And that's only for World War II that they were forcibly retired. There are stories of some that were used up until the 1950s. I mean, there's one by the Irish Free State that is owned by the Irish government that is still in military service today. Obviously, it's more of a museum piece, but it's fully functional. It still has to meet the demands that, military vehicles have to meet, and its guns are fired once a year just to make sure that everything is in working order. So you have this car, especially this one that I'm talking about, that's over 100 years old, that was used in the Irish Civil War, that is still in technical military service today. This is just a testament to the build quality of Rolls Royces of that time period. I mean, I was reading about this, and I was increasingly becoming more and more amazed about how well built these cars were. Not just well built, but they were reliable. They were overbuilt. This is the car that you wanted if you were worth your salt, if you had any sort of business in the car world, any sort of business being rich, any sort of business being pretentious and snobby, and a car person of the time period. This is the car you wanted. You wanted a Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. Not only that, they were basically the go-to car. When you had several car companies at the time. Now, I don't know if many of you all out there realize this, but during the early 20th century, there were a lot more car companies that there are today. I mean, there were things like Maxwell, Haynes Apperson, Cord, Duesenberg, Auburn. I mean, you name it, it existed. This, however, changed. And the reason why it changed is because many of these car companies just didn't last. They didn't last. And when you think of it, Rolls Royce obviously wasn't the only one building armored cars. Rolls Royce was building other cars. Rolls Royce was building airplane engines by the time the World Wars came around. There were other car companies. Fiat, for example, was building armored cars too. Let's just say they didn't last. You heard my podcast on Italian cars, live fast, die young. Italian cars have always lived by that motto. So the Fiat, they didn't hold up as well as the Rolls Royces. The Fiat, they would break down and then they would leave them behind because they cost too much time to work on. They cost too much money to work on. And they were like, you know what? We've got these Rolls Royces. We can just take these instead. I mean, there are some romantic stories. And I'm not talking about romantic as in like two people that love each other very much. I'm talking about romance in the sense that it's stirring. It stirs the soul. There's some romantic stories about the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost and the combat that these cars faced, the lives that these cars saved. I mean, it was insane. These cars were something else. I mean, there are people who claim that these cars were more precious than rubies. They claim that they wanted them for the rest of their lives. Autocar claimed that it was the best car in the world. And the fact that any car would be named the best car in the world of that time period was a feat in itself because cars were unreliable. Cars were not good. Cars were dangerous. Cars were killing people. I mean, this was a time period in which many people today can't conceivably understand that if you had a car, that didn't mean that you had something that was necessarily convenient. You had something that was seen as inconvenient, that was seen as smelly, that was seen as smoke belching, that was seen as basically a sign of hubris. Yeah, that man owns an automobile. He thinks he's better than everyone else. That's what cars were seen as back in that time period. Because the average person couldn't afford a car. Not until, Henry Ford came out with the Ford Model T, and I believe that was from 1908 to 1926 or something of that sort. So it was at least 2 years after the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost already came out that he was coming out with affordable automobiles. So when you think of it, this time period wasn't the best for cars, but the fact that Rolls-Royce was able to make the best of it, the fact that Rolls-Royce was able to use these cars in military service is amazing. Just think of that today. Could you imagine a Rolls-Royce Phantom being repurposed to be used in the war against ISIS in the Middle East? I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, they're not nearly as reliable for that. And of course, the rigors of warfare today are a lot different from the rigors of warfare of old. But still, you can't think of Cadillac commissioning cars to be used in the war effort. You can't think of Rolls-Royce or Bentley or Mercedes, maybe Mercedes-Benz with the G-Wagon. But I mean, you can't think of any car that you would normally drive today, even if you were filthy rich, being used in a war effort. It strikes me as odd. Today, there are many cars on the road that once started life as military vehicles and then that became civilian vehicles. For example, the two that I'm thinking of are the two that you're probably thinking of. The Jeep and the Humvee, and also the G-Wagon. So I guess there's three. These cars were all used first off as military spec vehicles. They were military spec vehicles and they did really well, and people who came back from war wanted the same cars that they used in the military to use at home, to use in their civilian lives. So as a result, Jeeps were made. As a result, Hummers were made from Humvees, and as a result, the G-Wagon was made from the military G-Wagon. And these cars today, fetch a premium. I mean, Jeeps are not cheap. I'm not saying Jeeps are as expensive as a G-Wagon, but compared to the average vehicle, a Jeep Wrangler is a bit more money. We're talking about the Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon that is obviously extremely expensive. We're talking about Hummer when Hummer was still a thing. That was also super expensive compared to the average vehicle because of the military roots that they had, the military cachet. Well, In those days, it was different. Rolls Royce, it's like they flipped it. They took the civilian car that everybody wanted that was really good, and they put it to military service when it was needed. That's not something that would happen today. I will say cars today are a lot less versatile than they were. Cars today are a lot less versatile in the sense that they are built for one purpose, and they are built for one purpose only. You're not going to see a Cadillac DeVille be turned into an ambulance like they were back in the 1950s. I mean, Cadillac DeVilles, Cadillac Fleetwoods of the time period, those full-size luxury car chassis were sent off to coach builders, and they were built into ambulances. They were built into hearses. They were built into working vehicles. You're not going to find that today. You're not going to find a Cadillac XTS be turned into an ambulance. You're not going to find a Cadillac CT6 be turned into an ambulance. But of that time period, luxury cars were basically the best cars that their brands had to offer, the best chassis and engines that they had to offer. So these were used as the workhorses that we think today. Before there were light trucks, before trucks were even common, before there were huge semi chassis that they would build buses off of, it, ambulances, and other sorts of foolishness as that. Luxury cars were the basis of your ambulances. Luxury cars were the basis of your police cars. Luxury cars were the basis of your hearses, and they still are today. I guess that's one thing that's been retained. And luxury cars, in the case of the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost, were the basis for military vehicles as well, for at least a time period. So it is to be said that there will never be another time period as the Edwardian era of cars, and there will never be another time period in which a Rolls Royce will be used in active combat. That is ludicrous. It's amazing, and I absolutely love it. So please stay tuned for the next segment in which I talk about some of the crazy war stories that these cars had to offer from back in the day. And please stay tuned till the very end, in which I will give you my personal thoughts on the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost and a crazy car story of my own. So please stay tuned, folks, after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Alrighty then, welcome back, folks. This is segment 3 of the podcast on the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. These Rolls Royce Silver Ghosts were amazing, and there are amazing stories associated with them. Before I tell you a story, I guess a story that has 2 parts to it almost, let me preface by saying this. In the days where cars were seen as unreliable, noisy, smoke-belching contraptions, the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghosts were the exception to the rule, especially on the military front, like I've been saying in segment 1 and in segment 2. We spoke about the civilian Rolls-Royce, we spoke about the military Rolls-Royce. Now we're going to be talking about the Rolls-Royce war stories that gave these cars the legendary status that they afford today. These were amazing. I've said that before. I will continue to say it again. The Rolls Royce Silver Ghost was a truly amazing automobile. And if Lawrence of Arabia were alive today, he would tell you that these cars were more precious than rubies. He was the one who said that. And when asked what was the thing he would most value, he said, I should like my own Rolls Royce car with enough tires and petrol to last me all my life. That's what he said. This guy was so enamored with the performance that his fleet of 9 Rolls Royce Silver Ghosts did in especially his trials in the Arabian desert. I mean, this was amazing. Like, just think about it. Take yourself back to late Victorian era, early Edwardian era. This is part of the British Empire. The British Empire is at its height. You are a military service for the empire in the name of King Edward, and you are wreaking havoc on enemy territory. And then they commission these 9 Rolls Royces, especially made from the empire itself. I mean, Britain was the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, the largest empire the world had ever seen, and this is at the height of the empire, and you are driving around in the finest automobile machinery, and you are just you are tearing stuff up in enemy territory. I mean, it's something they should make a movie about if they haven't already made a movie about. It's something that is romantic. It's something that is, oh my goodness, it's just, it gives you chills when you hear about it. I mean, this is a time period that will never exist again. And you are doing this, and you've got these cars that were made by the empire. You are affording them. You are able to wreak havoc on them, and this sense of pride that comes. You're a British soldier with a British-made car when actually British reliability and British build quality actually meant something. And you are there, and you are striking fear into the hearts of the enemy. I mean, it's amazing. It's awesome. It's a high that you can't experience anymore because British cars are pieces of junk nowadays, pardon me. But like, it's something that it's a once in history experience. The height of the British Empire, British engineering, British automobiles are the standard of the world, even though the Germans created the automobiles, but the British are leading the way as far as technology goes. And it's amazing. It's amazing. I can't explain it as well as people of old, as far as Lawrence of Arabia can explain it, but it's amazing. I mean, it's simply something you cannot experience anymore. He hailed them not only as being more valuable than rubies. He didn't worship these cars, but he had a healthy respect for them. I mean, these cars were instrumental in helping him win his revolt in the desert against the Turkish Ottoman forces at the time period. When asked by a journalist, he said that he would like a Rolls Royce car for the rest of his life. I mean, this is how much these cars made an impression on him. That same Lawrence of Arabia had, get this folks, he had just blown up a railway bridge. He had blown up a railway bridge, and he was escaping with his fleet of 9 Rolls Royces away from the enemy, and the enemy were in hot pursuit. I mean, they were on his tail. And get this, one of the cars blew a leaf spring. One of the cars blew a leaf spring, and what they ended up having to do, they panicked. They had a wooden board, but the wooden board was too long to fit over the leaf spring. So what this same Lawrence of Arabia did, he hopped out of the car and he shot the board in two with his pistol that he had on him, his military, commission pistol. He shot the board in two, and then they strapped it on, I guess with leather or with ropes, whatever, to the leaf spring, and they escaped. And not only did they escape, they continued driving this over the desert, gallivanting the desert for the next several weeks with a half-wooden suspension. I mean, just think of it. What car would allow you to do that today? I mean, there are no cars today that would allow you to do such a thing. And I mean, not only were they used in the desert. They were used in the Irish Civil War. I mean, these cars were used by the Irish Free State. They were commissioned by the British government to use in the Irish Civil War against the Irish Republican Army. And of course, we all know that the Irish Republican Army ended up winning at the end of the day because Ireland is a republic today. But even though they didn't win, you have some of these cars that are still in working order, that are still being used by the military for certain minor services. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. They were built that well. I mean, let's just go back to the story for a second. They shot the board into and strapped it on to the broken leaf spring with ropes, and they drove and they escaped the clutches of the enemy that way. This is not something that an average automobile would hold up to. This is a testament to reliability, to longevity, to resilience of the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. You can't get a Rolls Royce like that anymore. Today, Rolls Royces are plush automobiles that, coddle you in the finest leather and the finest upholstery and the finest luxury. And not to say that the civilian versions didn't do that then, but you couldn't strip a Rolls Royce down today and then send it into Iraq and pretend that it was going to be, a military grade vehicle. Yeah, right. I mean, they are far removed of their ancestors, if I could put it that way. I mean, that's just an amazing story. There are so many other stories. I mean, the Rolls Royce Silver Ghosts were named as such because they were so quiet. Enemies couldn't hear these cars approaching because they were that quiet. They were something different. They were something different. These cars, they were not just any piece of junk that you found lying around. This was a Rolls Royce. And not only that, these cemented the world-renowned status that Rolls Royce has today. And these cars found their way into several other cars down the line, at least in their name. You had the Rolls Royce Silver Seraph, the Rolls Royce Silver Spirit, the Rolls Royce Silver Spur, the Rolls Royce Ghost of today. I mean, these cars, the Rolls Royce cars eat, sleep, and breathe the memory of the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost, which was the best Rolls Royce ever made, the most valuable Rolls Royce ever made. The Silver Ghost, one of them was sold at auction, or was appraised, I guess, at $35 million. The most expensive car of all time. I mean, this is not, your regular childhood story. This is the stuff of legends I'm talking about. I mean, these cars were used in military warfare on so many fronts, helped escape enemies, rolling around with half wooden suspensions. They were used in the Irish Civil War. They were used all over the place. I mean, these cars were really what they were chalked up to be. They were the best car in the world. They may not be the best car in the world today by today's standards, but any person who knows what they're talking about in the car industry, in the car world, will know that the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost is truly a legend. A legend in its own right. A legend up there with the likes of the Ford Model T, the Volkswagen Beetle, other cars, I guess, the Cadillac Fleetwood. I mean, these cars, these were legends. These were legends. Legends in their own right, in the very, very true sense of the term. Most cars today won't handle backyard mechanics. Most cars today won't handle such abuse, won't handle being used in a military situation. And this is what I like to think of. I like to think of the Mercedes 300Ds, which, like I said earlier in segment 1, was probably the closest equivalent we have in the modern age to Rolls-Royce Silver Ghosts. These cars are still being used as African bush taxis in the African bush. I mean, these cars, the 5-cylinder diesel engine, I believe what they had, the 5-cylinder diesel that they had, was so infinitely reliable that they are still using them in some remote areas where car mechanics aren't readily available, doing backyard mechanics. I've seen these Mercedes 300Ds run off of vegetable oil, run off of biodiesel, run off of all sorts of different foolishness. They get 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 miles, are still being sold. I mean, if the Rolls Royce Silver Ghosts were made in such numbers as the 300Ds, I bet you there would still be ones being sold today. There are still being Silver Ghosts sold today for large sums of money because they aren't very common anymore, and many just didn't last all of these years. At least didn't last in running condition all of these years. But these are the same sort of class of vehicle as the Mercedes 300D. They are as durable as Earth itself, as I've once put it heard. It's romantic. It's amazing. These are the sorts of car stories I like to hear. I like to hear, people believing in their machines, people, swearing up and down that these are the best automobiles ever made because they helped save their lives in a war period. I mean, the people who designed the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost may have never imagined that they would be used in military service. I've never imagined that me, 114 years later after the first one rolled off the line, that I would be sitting here in 2020, ranting for an hour about how wonderful the cars were. They were just thinking that they were building a luxury car for people who could afford a luxury car. Never could they have thought that these cars would still be running 100 years from now, or 100 years from then, that they would be used in military service, that some of them would be still used in military service up until World War II, when 76 were still in commission. Nobody could have thought of that. Nobody could have thought of that. And the fact that they did is a testament to build quality. It's a testament to reliability. It's a testament to the principles of what make a car, boiled down to its purest form. And in the time period, at least, that was the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. They took everything that a car should be, they fine-tuned it, they boiled it down, they refined it, and this is the product that we have as a result. And let me tell you, I don't think anybody was complaining. But please stay tuned for segment 4, in which I give you my short personal thoughts about the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost, and then I will share with you a crazy car story of my own, that's reminiscent of these war stories that we've heard. So please stay tuned and enjoy the break.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Okay, welcome back, folks. Finally, segment 4. I can rant. I can talk. I can say whatever I want. This is great. In the previous segments, we talked about the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. We talked about the Rolls Royce armored car that was the military spec of the Silver Ghost. And we spoke about Lawrence of Arabia's crazy war stories about the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost in segment 3. And now I'm going to tell you what I think of the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. The other day, I was with my girlfriend, and we had gone to the Sarasota Car Museum. And there was a Rolls Royce Silver Ghost in there that was owned by the wife of one of the Ringling brothers. And if you all don't know anything about Sarasota, Florida, the Ringlings left their mark on Sarasota. There's the Cottazon. This is where the circus is held. And this is where they basically lived their lives. And after they passed away, their cars were eventually donated to the Sarasota Automobile Museum. And here we are, and she sees this car, and she's like, oh my gosh, David, that's gorgeous. And I was like, she's like, what is it? I was like, well, that's a Rolls Royce Silver Ghost, as the plaque had said. And I was telling her that, look, these cars were legendary in their time period. These cars were used in the desert, and they were so quiet that the enemy couldn't hear them approaching, and that they had helped several people escape. They had saved lives. They had done other sorts of war stories that they were used in war. They were used in World War I. And she's like, that should be what your next podcast is about. And lo and behold, here we are about a week and a half later. This is what my most recent podcast has been on. I would like to tell you that she had good taste. That she appreciated the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost without even knowing anything about it, just seeing it upon it being presented to her. And then I would like to say that she was correct. These cars were gorgeous. These cars were amazing. These cars were well built. They were reliable. That's something you can tell by looking at the car just when you see it. When you saw a Ford Model T, which was nicknamed the Tin Lizzie, of the same time period, the Edwardian, the brass era, next to a Rolls Royce Silver Ghost, it's like looking at a Ford Fiesta versus a Rolls Royce Phantom today. They are night and day. You can tell that they are not the same price range. You can tell they are not the same sort of car whatsoever. And this is what I guess my girlfriend saw when she first saw it. I would say my personal thoughts, I've known about this car since the early days of my childhood. I had read about it in a book somewhere, and ever since hearing about it, it's left an impression on me what these cars did, and what their military service was during World War I. And as I end up learning recently, into World War II. These cars were, I guess, oh goodness, they were quite something. They were the standard of the world before Cadillac was the standard of the world. That's what they were. They were the best car in the world. They were the standard. This is what every automaker hoped to be. They hoped to make a Rolls Royce Silver Ghost, just like Rolls Royce made a Rolls Royce Silver Ghost. In some of the stories that they had from the military, it really inspired me. It really inspired me, and it also reminded me of some of the crazy stories that I have with car ownership. Of course, I'm not Lawrence of Arabia. I'm not shooting boards in two and strapping them onto my leaf springs and then riding around Cape Coral with, a half wooden suspension. I'm not doing that. But I will tell you that I've had my fair share of experiences. And allow me to tell you this story. That you all have stayed tuned for until this point. This is not a Rolls Royce. I do not own a Rolls Royce. But it's a luxury car nonetheless. And it has some crazy stories, which upon hearing the crazy stories that the Rolls Royce Silver Ghost had, I decided to share this one with you all. I have a 2004 Buick Park Avenue Ultra, affectionately named Betty Love, Betty for short. Okay, so I purchased this car in January of 2018 for $3,000. That was all. It had 75,000 miles on it and some change, almost 76,000 miles. And I bought this after my Honda Civic was totaled in a car wreck. I hated the Honda Civic. And before that, I only had that Civic for 4 months. I was driving a Cadillac, a 1997 Cadillac DeVille, affectionately known as Miss Faith. After Miss Faith died, I had to get a car. Got the car from an auction. My dad bought it for me. I told my dad I wasn't going to keep it for 6 months. 4 months later, it got totaled. I got the money from the insurance and I put it towards a Buick Park Avenue Ultra. Now, just to put it into perspective here, I am a broke college student. I am driving an aging luxury car, and as reliable as the Buick 3800 engine is, it is still an aging luxury car, so there are small things that will go out. One of the things that went out about a year ago now was the horn button. You see, GM cars of this time period had a sort of issue with their horn buttons. They were known for getting stuck after a while. The same thing happened in my 1998 Cadillac DeVille. That was my first car. At least in that time, the Cadillac, if I beat the steering wheel enough after the horn started going off, it would stop. It wouldn't continue to go off. Well, the horn button on the Buick Park Avenue, it seemed to have, I don't know, a bloodthirst or something. It wouldn't stop. I'm pulling into USF. I used to go to the University of South Florida. I just graduated a few months ago. And I'm pulling into USF, I think Monday or Tuesday morning. And I'm pulling into the park. And as soon as I begin to turn onto the campus from Fowler Avenue in Tampa, the horn starts blaring. And I don't realize it's my horn because I'm not pressing it. There's no reason for me to be using the horn. I thought someone else was just freaking out. And it's when I had, driven, gotten away from all of the other cars, and I realized it was my horn. So here I'm freaking out. I pull into a parking lot. I start beating the steering wheel thinking that the same trick that worked on my Cadillac was going to work. No. It doesn't work. So I have to hop out of the car. I have to go under the hood, and I was going to try to find the horn relay or something. I had no idea what I was doing. And all of a sudden the horn just stops. I'm like, oh, okay. That was odd. So I go to park the car, in my parking lot, and I go to press the key fob to lock it, and I realize the horn doesn't beat back. I was like, oh, that's odd. I guess the horn has gone out. I guess the fuse has gone bad or something. So I go to class, and then I text work that day. I was like, look, my car has an electrical issue. I'm going to be late to work. I might not be able to come in today because I need to go figure out what on earth is wrong with my car. Because I live in the Tampa Bay area, and if any of you listening to this have ever driven in the Tampa Bay area, you will understand why it is absolutely imperative for you to have a horn on your car. If not, you could lose your life. I'm not even kidding. So I try to figure out what on earth is wrong with my car. After my first two classes, I didn't have a third class that day. I hop in my car and I drive back to my house. I go inside. I call up my mechanic because we had a man that used to come and work on our cars who was a traveling mechanic. So I call up Charlie. I was like, hey, Charlie, do you know the reason why my horn would do this? And he's like, yes, your horn button's collapsed. And he's like, that's a common problem with GM cars of that time period. He's like, it's going to cost a lot of money for you to get a new horn. He's like, it's going to cost like $600 because you have to order the airbag assembly because the horn button is integrated into the steering wheel airbag assembly. And he's like, you got to get a new airbag and then you got to get it installed. I was like, oh, fiddlesticks. So here am I. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm screwed. I'm out of luck. And then I call up my dad, and then he's like, yeah, that's Charlie's probably right. That's going to be an expensive fix. You're probably just going to need to drive the car without a horn. And here I am determined. Just to tie it back into the story, think of it. Lawrence of Arabia was caught himself in a pickle. Of course, I didn't have enemy Turkish forces, bearing down my neck. But nonetheless, I was caught in a pickle. I had to do some quick thinking. I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to call out of work, and I'm going to go down to the junkyard. Okay, go down to the junkyard. It's a you-pull-it style junkyard, so you go in, and then you go in with your own tools, and then you pull the parts off yourself, and then you check. So, I go in, and it is blazing Florida heat. I mean, it's still hot. It was probably, maybe it was January. Maybe it wasn't even quite so much a year ago, but it's still freaking hot outside. So I'm, there in the hot sun, and I'm trying to find a Buick with the same style steering wheel as mine. And these cars are very durable, so they're not extremely common in the junkyards, at least not as common as Cadillac DeVille's. So I finally find a Buick LeSabre that has a brown interior. And I was like, you know what? If I have to have a brown steering wheel pad and my interior is gray, so what? Let's do it. So I look up a YouTube video on how to remove the steering wheel pad, the horn and everything and it is showing me, and you have to stick like these tools into these little holes into the back of the steering wheel. Well, the steering wheel is obviously mounted on the car, so I'm not going to get a screwdriver into it. So what I end up having to do, I end up having to break the plastic around the back of the steering wheel, undoing the clips myself, and then holding it, and clipping the airbag, and unclipping the horn of relay or the horn wire, whatever it is, and I take it with me. And then I find a Buick that has the same color interior as mine. So I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to nix this airbag over here. Goodness, I'm going to get this one. So I found one. And then thankfully, in retrospect, I actually couldn't purchase it because I went up to the point where you have to check out, and they were like, yeah, you can't purchase airbags. It's a liability issue. I was like, what? And then they point at the sign on the wall. Of course, these people are curt. They're very short-spoken, short, sweet, and to the point. And they're like, look at the sign. You can't purchase airbags. I was like, oh, my God. I just spent all this time. I got tar on my favorite pair of pants. I spent all this time, undoing this airbag, finding out how to do it, only for me to find out that I actually can't purchase it. So at this point, I'm frantic, I'm frustrated, I'm just exhausted. And then I was like, do you know of any junkyard that I can actually buy an airbag from where they don't care about the liability or whatnot? And he's like, well, if you call up this place at this number, you can do this. I was like, okay, give me the place. Well, by this time, it's about 4:30. These people, close at 5, but they close their junkyard at 4. So I call up, and then they're like, well, we can reserve it for you, and you can come in tomorrow. Just ask to speak to Jose or whatever. And I was like, oh, okay. So the next day, I obviously, had to go to class. After class, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go to the junkyard. I'm going to go to the junkyard, spend 30 minutes there. They're going to get the part for me, and I'm going to, put it in the back of my car. When I get home, I'll install. Well, I pull up there at, probably 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm thinking I'm going to be out of there by 10:30, 10:45. No, folks. I am there, and I tell them, I'm here to pick up this part. They reserved it for me yesterday. They said it was going to cost $100. They're like, well, we didn't know. I was like, okay. And he's like, well, it should take us, 15, 30 minutes to get it off. I was like, okay, I can wait 15, 30 minutes. So I go sit down. 45 minutes later, I'm still there. And then I go back up. And then I speak to this man. And then he's like, oh, no, we actually said it was going to take 45 minutes to an hour. I was like, okay, that's not true. But I guess I will sit here because who am I to argue? I need the part. And however long it's going to take them, I'm going to have to wait. So what ends up happening? 4 hours later, they finally come out, and they're like, look, we're really sorry. It's taken us this long. You know what? We're just going to give you 25% off. You could give us $75 for it, and we're just going to give you the entire steering column because we can't figure out how to take this airbag assembly off of the steering wheel. So I was like, all right, y'all are a bunch of idiots because I know how to take it off, but I'm not going to complain. Because I'm getting $1,000 worth of parts for $75. They literally gave me the entire steering column of a Buick Park Avenue of this time period. So I take the steering column, I stuff it in my bag, and I go off to work. By this point, I'm 2 hours late, but I already spoke to my boss. I get there, and then I begin telling them the story. So that same night, I go home, and I don't even remember if I had homework or whatnot. I'm outside in the Floridian humidity. Mosquitoes are biting me, and I'm like, you know what? I am determined to change this airbag and this steer. So what I end up having to do, I end up having to go under the hood, disconnect the battery. And then instead of going behind the steering wheel to undo the clips that clip the airbag in place, I had to go in through the front of the steering wheel because I couldn't get the angle right so I can do it. So I ended up having to go through the front of the steering wheel around the edges where the airbag assembly meets the plastic. And then what I end up having to do, I end up having to wedge it out of place and then undo the clips. And of course, I'm, fiddling with this flashlight. I'm holding it in my mouth. I've got, a crochet hook. I have a flathead screwdriver. I've got a hubcap remover, and I've got a flashlight. And you know what? I've got all my tools. I got my handy dandy crochet hook in there, and I'm undoing these clips. Well, after about 2 hours, now it was about 11:30. It's about 1:30 in the morning. I finally undo it, and I put in the new one. And then before I push it back in, I was like, you know what, let me connect the battery and let me test the key fob to make sure that the horn is not stuck and that it works. I connect the battery, press the key fob, it works. It works. And then I've noticed that my horn sounds different. And that's because in retrospect, the lower pitched horn, because most cars have two horns, a higher pitch and a lower pitch that work in conjunction to make it really loud. The higher pitch was the only one that was left working. The lower pitch had actually stopped working. And so that left me in a sort of pickle. But I was like, oh yeah, my horn's not loud enough. It sounds different, but whatever. I've got a working horn. That works for about 7 or 8 months. Here I am, just the other day, about 2 weeks ago. I am with my car, and this time the same thing doesn't happen. This time, I realized that the horn is not working at all. So I was like, oh, maybe the horn fuse is gone. Because last time, the horn fuse blew because the horn button got stuck. But I was like, well, let me go check the horn fuse. I bought this fuse tester and everything. I tested the fuse. It was fine. I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, okay, maybe the horn itself went out. So I go to the junkyard. I buy 2 sets of horns. I buy one from a Cadillac DeVille and one from a Buick Park Avenue. They use the same horn. And I strap on the one from the Cadillac DeVille. I undo mine. I put it on. Of course, I have to remove the wheel, remove the interior fender well, go in, undo the clips and the wires, and then I have to plug the new one in, bolt it back on, and then I go to put the relay back in. The horn starts blaring. Okay. I was like, wow, my horn button is stuck again. So I leave the horn in, I pull the relay, I stick it in the glove box of the car. I was like, all right, I'm going to have to buy another horn bag, a horn airbag assembly. So I order the parts online, and then they finally come in yesterday, and then I put it on. And then I have to do the same shebang that I did several months ago, going through the front, be careful not to shatter the plastic around the steering wheel, undo the clips. This time it only takes me 45 minutes. I slap it back on, and I have a working horn now. And just to show you that you can also be a backyard mechanic on your car, I have absolutely no expertise on cars, at least mechanically working on them, absolutely none whatsoever. And I will still manage to remove my wheel, change the horn, change the relay, and put in a new airbag assembly after removing the second one. And this is the second time that I've done this since I've had the car. So I wanted to share that short story with you all, and it kind of reminded me of some of the stories that they had from, the Rolls Royce in the desert and some of the backyard mechanics they had to do and how these cars just took it. And poor Betty over here is just taking my backyard mechanics too. So thank you for tuning into the GSMC podcast this week, folks. Please remember to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Leave a nice comment and follow us. That really helps us. And thank you, and have a good night. Thank you very much. Have a good night, y'all.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.